Guten Abend. Ich heiße Sie herzlich willkommen im Namen der Familienforschungszentrum und hoffe, dass heute Abend für Sie eine Freude sein wird. For the rest of you who can't speak German, the rest of it will be in English. Germans are known for certain characteristics. A lot of those characteristics are hardworking. You give them a job and they get the job done. They stick to it. Matter of fact, sometimes we refer to that as stubbornness. When we really get angry, we call it bullheadedness. But the Germans are very, very industrious. A young man took his clock into a German watchmaker. He says, "You know, something's really the matter with this clock. It just goes tick, 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 tick." He says, "Is there anything you can do for it?" The old German looked him in the eye and says, "Don't you worry. I have ways to make it talk." Tonight the first part of it is going to give you background information and tools you need to do German research and an understanding of where the German nation evolved from and where it ended up being today. So when we get started, why is it important, German research? In the 1790 census, there were about 280,000 Germans in the United States. They had come to America at the invitation of not only the original colonies, but of people that they had known back in the old country and then had brought them over. In this group, we have a great number of them that came over as indentured servants. But then during the colonial period, most people immigrated as indentured servants. About 280,000. Now, I would like to abolish one myth that started saying that German would have been the language in America except for one vote. Well, if you look at it, the English had 1.9 million people, and the Germans had 280,000. And I think in a voting system, 1.9 million beats 280,000. In 1990, the people with German ancestry topped the ethnic groups within the United States. Over 58, almost 58 million people, 23.3% of all Americans could claim German heritage. So what it means then is that we have it. In 1990, they also color-coded the nation's map. If a preponderance of the population in a county was of a certain ethnic group, they gave it that color. Now, a preponderance doesn't mean a majority. It means if there were 27% of them were Germans and 21% of them were Norwegians, the Germans got the color. Okay? But light blue is German ethnicity. So you can see that when we start over, going all the way from the East Coast, all the way across the northern tier, we have counties that have a predominance of German ancestry. They also settled in the northern tier. Now, people ask, why did they do that? I like what Garrison Keillor said about his ancestors from Sweden. He said, "I often marvel," he says, "that my ancestors would give up their homeland, take the treacherous journey across the stormy Atlantic, and then once they reached America, go halfway across the nation to find a place just as cold and miserable as the one they left." The reason for it is that in northern Europe, or in Europe, northern part of Europe, the major crop is grain. And where does grain grow best? Where you have a winter, where you have snow, so that the seed gets the moisture in the spring and can grow and germinate, and you can harvest in a long, dry fall. And that's why they ended up in the northern tier of the United States. Things we need to begin. First of all, if you're going to look for German records, you need a German word list. Yes, these records are in German. So you're going to know. But really, you only need about 20 words to be able to decipher a German record. You go to FamilySearch.org. You go to the Learn button. And when you get down into the wiki portion of it, ask for a German word list, and it will give you probably 10 pages on the German alphabet and German words. But the ones on the screen are really the only ones necessary to be able to interpret records. You've got to know birth, baptism, christening, marriage, death, father, mother, marriage, those type of things. So what you end up with then is really a limited vocabulary is all that's necessary to recognize what is in the records. Remember, too, that the earliest records are church records. The only people who were educated was the clergy and the nobility. And the clergy was educated in Latin. So the earliest church records are in Latin. Just a word of caution when you find them. When you get a name like Jakobus, his German name is Jakob. Okay, the US on it is the Latin form of the word. Okay, go to the Mesa site. Go to Research Helps. And under Research Helps, you go to the German side and you'll find two PowerPoint presentations, Finding Your German Origins and Steps in Tracing Your German Ancestry. Those you can download on your own computer and watch at your own time. On the Family Search site, if you go under Learn there is a complete section on Germany, including two very, very good tutorials on the Old German script. So you've got some good help to get started. Now, naming practices. This lovely lady on the left is my mother after she came to New York in 1928. She was asked to be a model, and they gave her the wardrobe and went and took pictures of her in Central Park, and she was given copies of the pictures. And so we have that. The other picture is my grandmother, who came over in 1964 at the age of 64. And she, at the age of 85, we sent her and my mother back to Germany so she could visit her homeland one more time before she passed away. She passed away the next year. Okay. This picture is also interesting for me because through this picture, I was able to locate 125 of my German ancestors that I didn't know existed. Church customs. Typically, every person is given 2 or more names. I have an ancestor that was christened with 9 names. Sometimes it's every godparent or aunt or uncle that shows up to the christening, they get tossed into the pile. But 2 or more names. The first name is typically a spiritual name or the name of a saint. That is why we find such a predominance of names like Johann, John. We find James. We find Mary. We find Magdalena. These are all the spiritual names that were given. The second name is a secular name, and that's usually the name the person goes by. Now, just to make it more interesting, Sometimes when they come to the United States, they adopt their secular name and don't go by the name they went by in Germany. So it makes it really fun when you get looking. Common German names. You find names like Johann Georg, but if he's called Johann Georg Schmidt, he will be called Georg. Johann is his spiritual name. Maria, you go on, it's Maria Elizabeth Schmidt, she'd be known as Elizabeth. To make it more fun, she's probably known on the census records as Lizzie or Ellie. So it gives you some fun. Okay, this is my mom. Her birth certificate, she was christened Magdalena Irena. But she went by Irena or Irene. Matter of fact, in America, she changed her name to Irene Magdalena. So that these things will take place. Now, sometimes you're going to find records and you're going to think you're going crazy because you're finding the same name with different birth dates. It is very customary in Germany, especially in the 17th and 18th centuries. If a baby dies in infancy, the next child of that sex is given the same name. So in this family, we have 4 Ursulas. Only one of them survived, the one with the latest birth date of 1620. You have 3 Johannes, and you notice that they were born a year apart, and it's only the 3rd one that survived. So out of the 11 children, actually only 6 children survived. But yes, all of the Ursulas were named Ursula, and the birth dates are correct. So you sit there and you see a record like that, you're not seeing double. Nobody made a mistake. It actually occurred. When you're looking for them, you can look for them by their spiritual name, because that's usually what the name they will go by in the official records, especially church records. Or you can look for them by their secular name, or you can look for them on both. Now, certain parts of the Prussian Empire, particularly the Russian part, or Prussian part over on the far east, they only gave them one name. Sometimes 2. So, it depends on where you're doing your research and how solid this is going to be. Senior and junior, German Alt and Jung. 2 people, but not necessarily father and son. What you have is in a village, you will have 2 people with the name of Johann. The older one will be called Alt Johann, and the younger one will be called Jung Johann. But they are not necessarily from the same family. They're just differentiating the people in the villages. Okay? So it's not grandfather or grandson or father and son. They may not even be related, so don't let that throw you when you see them referred to like that. Then you can find, in records, you're going to find 2 men with the same name, married to women with the same name, but it doesn't give the maiden name. And how do you tell them apart? You have 2 marriage records, looks like the same people, just different dates. Separate them by the children's godparents from the birth records of their children. You will find that they have different sets of godparents, and so that will identify them as separate families. What is the name of the first child? This is one that sometimes there's a pattern. Sometimes they're named after grandparents. The male after the male grandparent, and the female after the female grandparent. Sometimes they're named after the godparents. So again, you want to look at on records where you see the godparents or the sponsors, particularly on birth records, you'll want to look for those names and see if there's a consistency with the children of those names. Endings to names. Endings typically apply to the occupation or the location from which they come. So it's an ER end. So Forst, which is a forest in Germany, you'll have a Forster or a Förstner, which would be a forest ranger or a person who works in the forest. Berlin, the name would then be Berliner. Kirche, if they work at the church, it would be Kircher or Kircher, depending on what part of Germany you come from. They refer to it, especially up in Schleswig-Holstein. Kirche becomes Kirche with an E. Then the one that I always find very, very interesting, just because the word has von in it does not mean it's nobility. To identify it when the people would move from village to village, sometimes to identify them as separate people, they would sit there and say Johann, which was from the village born there. Then another Johann moves in, he becomes Johann von Steinbach, to differentiate the two. Has nothing necessarily to do with nobility, although they love to throw that phone in there to make it sound noble. So when I go to Germany, I'm Stefan von Mesa. Gothic letters. Oh, these are fun. This will give you a headache like nothing else. There are approximately 180 million people in the world today that still use German as their primary language. You've got 7 countries where it's an official language. Germany, of course, and Austria, although most Germans don't believe Austrians really speak German. Liechtenstein, which is a little hub just between Austria and Germany on the Lake Constance. The reason it's important is it probably has more money stored there than any other place in Europe, with exception of Switzerland. So then you have Switzerland, and that only applies to what's called the Berner Oberland, which basically goes from Bern up through Lucerne and Zurich. They speak German, but their version of it is called Schweizerdeutsch. And you have to listen very, very carefully to listen to it. It's a dialect. Luxembourg, the official language in Luxembourg is German, not French. The Bolzano area in southern Tyrol in Italy, or it's actually northern Italy, they still speak German. As a matter of fact, I have a collection of wooden figurines called the Shepherd Collection, which is a limited edition from the Henri Company, which comes up there from Gardental in northern Italy. They speak nothing but German there in the whole valley. And then in Belgium, in the eastern part of Belgium, they speak German on the German border rather than Flemish or Dutch. There were no binding spelling rules before 1871 for the entire German Empire. They spelled things phonetically. Fortunately, with the German alphabet, spelling phonetically works much better than English spelling, because there is only one sound to the vowels and consonants. So you end up with that. So remember, there can be differences in spelling, but they are the same, just like here. The Gothic style of handwriting officially changed in 1942 when Hitler changed it from the system called Courant, and he changed it then to a Roman style, which made it much, much easier for everybody to read. There are 4 letters in German that we do not have any in English. They're called the umlauts. They can be written, the umlaut A is written AE, the umlaut U is written UE, The umlaut O is written O-E, and then this little thing at the bottom is a double S, called in German Sz. Now, when we're looking for names in German, especially people who came to the United States, instead of spelling out the umlaut, they just took the two dots off of it. So you're going to have a change of the German record and the way the name is spelled in America. And so you're going to have to look for that difference. And it's usually you can go by the way the name is pronounced. If you're looking for old German script samples, Google it. Just Google old German script. And you'll get here all kinds of samples. And this is a copy of the old German script. The areas that really cause us problems are the D, the B, and then the H, the M's, the V's, and the W's. Those are the ones that are hardest to read. But you notice a lot of them look the same except the way the curls are, the K and the R. So you have to look at it. That's a capital S, believe it or not, and that's a small s. So when you're looking at it, what I found is I get this alphabet, and then I will write a German word in the alphabet. Painstakingly go ahead and write it out. Then I can recognize the pattern for a word when I see it in a record. If I know I'm looking for Heinrichs, I'll write out Heinrich so I can recognize Heinrich when I find it. In the printed version of it, you have it here too. So you've got the printed version. It's easier to read but can still cause problems. Okay, so Gothic is going to be the biggest problem. If you are really die-hard about it, BYU teaches a class on Gothic handwriting. And it's a whole semester long. And you don't have to speak German to do it. They just teach you the alphabet. And one of the missionaries here got a letter from her granddaughter at BYU that had taken the class. It was English, but written in Old German Gothic. It became a very interesting exercise of reading. Okay, the other thing we need to understand now is German migration. Where did the Germans go, and what was the force behind it? If you look at the Roman Empire about 300 AD, this is a time when the Roman Empire was falling apart. Rome had been sacked 3 or 4 times already. The locals were rising up against the Romans, and the Romans couldn't keep the forces in these countries, and they started pulling back. The area here is called the Western Roman Empire. You'll notice that the Germanic tribes come up against it here, and they were going through. The German tribes here, before the Romans came in, were driven out and had settled in the areas of France and Spain as we know it today. And it was in this little area right here in the kingdom of Lombard that the Holy Roman Empire got its start. So this is where we have our Germanic people up here, and then we go in. Now, about the same time, 125 to about 1300, the Teutonic Knights from the German Empire, German tribes, moved up the Baltic Ocean and settled this area up in here. We have the Russian Empire here and here, and then you have the Holy Roman Empire over here. During this same period of time, then it goes in. Oh boy. Okay. They go in, and by 1455 they were settled in. The interesting thing about this is you should pay attention is this is the area of Prussia. This is where the Prussians started and when they came out. Okay, by 1466, the Prussian Empire now is very strong, and it goes in. and you're going over in here to the kingdom that's called Brandenburg. The Holy Roman Empire started, it actually went from 962 to 1806, and it started from the Lombard Empire by Karl the Grosse, Charles the Great, or Charlemagne. And he was crowned the emperor of the Roman Empire in 800 AD. By this time, the Romans had lost their power, and they'd gone in, and Charlemagne had risen now from the Lombard kingdom, and he had expanded to the east, and as he conquered these non-Christian nations, he Christianized them and brought them into Christianity. So by 1000 AD, the Holy Roman Empire stretched from Spain and France all the way over here and down in and into Italy and Sicily in these areas here. This is the Papal States right here. So by 1000, Otto III had been crowned by the Pope as the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, which gave them power over the secular as well as the religious portion of the people's lives, which gave them absolute power. Now, this was a loosely formed federation, and there were many states within it, and each state had their own nobility, and the nobility collected taxes, nobility furnished military, and they paid not only homage, but taxes to the Holy Roman Empire. By 1512, they came in and they are pretty much settled into the final shape of the Holy Roman Empire, and it's starting to fall apart. During this time, the kingdom of Brandenburg and Saxony combined, they were becoming very restless and were starting to rebel against the Holy Roman Empire. And so they came in, and 100 years later. Now, in early 1500s, you had the Reformation. You got Martin Luther, who was a German priest. He was professor of theology at the University of Marburg. And he wrote his 95 theses in 1517, and he was hauled before a council and excommunicated because he would not retract his statements. Now, this was because of the sale of indulgences and what he felt was the corruption of the Catholic Church. The princes of each of the individual kingdoms chose either to back Catholicism or to back Luther. And so a civil war broke out between the Protestants and the Catholics. In Switzerland and England and in France, there were followers of Calvin. Zwingli in Switzerland emerged, and they formed their own religion. The Church of England broke away from Catholicism, of course, and formed the Church of England. The Anabaptists formed other groups. The key of the Anabaptists is they felt that a person, in order to accept Christ in their life and be baptized, had to be old enough to make that commitment, which they determined to be the age of 21. So they condemned infant baptism, and they practiced then a baptism of adults. Okay, so they formed groups in France. They were the Huguenots. In the lower kingdoms, Belgium and Holland, they became the Mennonites. And down in the Palatinate in German Empire, they became the Amish. And so these were the Anabaptist groups that formed during that period of time. The religious war followed. I mean, this was bloody. This was, okay, Friday night, let's go out and get drunk, and then we'll go out and kill ourselves a few Protestants. Or we'll get drunk, we'll go out, we'll kill a few Catholics. And this went on constantly, and then from one state to another state. So during this period of time, the Holy Roman Empire decided they had to take action and stop it. So what we had then was a Peace of Augsburg signed in 1555, signed by Charles III, Holy Roman Empire, who was ruling the Holy Roman Empire from Prague. The seat of the emperor changed every time the emperor did. It was not one location. So it changed all the time. Under Charlemagne, it was in Aachen. Under Charles V, it was in Prague. So In Prague, he was called Karl. So if you're there on tour, you've got Charles Bridge and all those sites there. They were all made during his reign. It ceased the fightings between Catholics and Protestants. And what they did, there were 225 individual German kingdoms or states within the Holy Roman Empire, and each of them could choose which they were going to be, whether Catholic or Protestant. And being a tolerant, loving, caring nation, whatever the leader chose, you were. If you didn't like it, get out. It was really a my way or the highway type rule. And so what happened again, if they didn't adopt the religion of the state, they were still persecuted. So you had a lot of people that had to move. Spain, France, and Italy selected Catholicism as the state religion. All non-Catholics were persecuted. England was the Church of England, and Henry decided that he was going to be very calm about this. If you wanted to be Catholic or some other religion, he put you on what was called the separatist list. He wanted to keep track of you. Okay? This peace did not apply to Calvinism, to the Anabaptists, or Zwingliism. So if you were a follower of Calvin, if you were an Anabaptist, or in Switzerland a Zwingliist, you were still persecuted. Now, the people in Salzburg had adopted Calvinism, and when the Habsburg Empire Austria chose Catholicism, they expelled them. And they went to the Palatinate in Germany where they were accepted. Okay. The migrations, Huguenots from France went to West Prussia. The Mennonites from the Low Countries went to West Prussia. The Anabaptists from the Palatinate, they were one of the main migrations we'll talk about in the second portion. And the Calvinists went from the Palatinate and from Switzerland, and they migrated. But a lot of these were moving over into the Prussian Empire, which was not part of the Holy Roman Empire, and they did practice tolerism and allowed different religions. So then the Puritans from England, of course, we know what happened to them. They went to Holland to escape being thrown into prison, and they sailed from Rotterdam. So they go in, and they see them going from the Low Countries into Prussia, from France into Prussia, and from England they went over to Rotterdam as their temporary spot before they sailed for America. In 1618, Spain, who was still bitter about the fact they had lost the lower kingdoms, which was Belgium and Holland, they had chosen to go Protestant, they decided that they would take it back. Their cousins in France said, you cannot come through France with your army. So they went through Germany, went in through Munich, came over to the Rhine River, and went up the Rhine. It was fought primarily in Germany. It started as a religious war between Catholics and Protestants, and then it just became an all-out war for power and land grab. At one time, it included most European countries. Everybody was going to get their lick in. Germany was devastated by pillage, rape, and burn tactics of the invading armies. Remember, when the armies came in, they didn't have a supply train behind them. They would come in and they would steal everything they could lay their hands on. Every pig, every chicken, every cow. They would slaughter it and take with them all the grain, and what they left behind was a burned out village and no crops, no food. Germany lost 1/3 of its population, over 5 million people. This shows you all of the countries that were involved during the 30 Years' War, and where the emperor and Bavaria were on the side of Spain and the papacy and Poland. The red were the Protestants. You know, Saxony changed sides. The Palatinate, Hessen Castle, Brandenburg, Russia got in on it. The Dutch were involved. Of course, it was about Holland. Denmark, Sweden, France, England, Savoy, Transylvania. And so you can see all of it came in. Casualties. Württemberg lost 75% population. Brandenburg in the north lost 50% of its population when the Swedes came in on a land grab, decided they were going to get their 2 bits worth. The German male population was cut in half. 1 out of every 2 German men were killed. 15,000 villages were destroyed, and 50% of all German towns. Now, you can figure that after all of this devastation, going into the next winter with no food, you can imagine the conditions as were. 1648. On this slide, what you're going to see is the darker the color, the heavier the casualty rates. This is Brandenburg, this is Hessen, and this is then Württemberg here. And this is the Palatinate, goes up this area right in here. So that gives you an idea of what it was. Then the French came in 1678, 1681, and they fought over Alsace-Lorraine. Then they fought over the Palatinate from 1688 to 1697. Then the War of Spanish Succession between the Holy Roman Empire and Spain from 1701 to 1714. Then our buddies up in Prussia started coming to power. And they became a power in 1528, and they ruled then through 1918. So as they came into power, you'll notice here that they started over here, the Duchy of Prussia. They added these territories. They took Silesia away from the Austrian Empire, Brandenburg, and now here's your Holy Roman Empire. This is in 1795. In 1806, Napoleon defeated the Holy Roman Emperor, and they abdicated power, and the Holy Roman Empire collapsed. The Prussian Empire was ready to take over and take power. All right. Got to stop clicking there. So by 1807 to 1871, Prussia, who had started in this area here, had taken all of Germany and all the way back up into the borders here by 1871. And Otto von Bismarck then formed what was called the Federation of German States, which included Bavaria and Baden-Württemberg, which had remained neutral prior to that time. Yes? Oh, good question. I'll show you, probably on the next map. Okay? But basically, it goes right down there. In 1762, Catherine II, who was a minor German princess, was sold for a dowry of $5 million a year to Peter, the Tsar of Russia. Peter died under mysterious circumstances, and Catherine took the throne. She had just fought a war against the Ottoman Turks, which had decimated the population of the southern boundaries of Russia. And she decides she needs to have people in Russia to settle. So she issued 2 manifestos. The first one was ignored. The second one, she spelled out conditions where Germans would be allowed to migrate to Russia. Russia would give them money and land when they got there. gave them the rights of self-government, and gave them the privilege of non-military conscription. So they're sitting there saying, wait a minute, I can get out of all these wars, and I can go to Russia, they're going to give me land, and I don't have to do the military, and we can rule ourselves. The Russians aren't going to rule us. So they went. 7,000 families immigrated between 1764 and 1767. This is very well documented. 104 villages were formed, 200 to 250 people per village. Isolation was practiced. There were Lutheran villages, there were Reformed Lutheran villages, there were Catholic villages, and there were Mennonite. But ne'er should they mix. Okay, so where they went into the area here along the Volga River, and they set up then, there's villages along the Volga, and you're going to refer to it, they call it the Bergseite, or the mountainside, and the Wiesenside, or the steppe side here, and that was the village here. An interesting side note, trivia. During Second World War, Stalin was afraid that the Volga Germans might join the German forces that were coming that way. So he forcefully sent 250,000 Germans to Kazakhstan. And they formed a core of a population in Kazakhstan. In 1786, the Mennonites from West Prussia began to migrate to Russia due to the partition of Poland, which threatened their military service exemption. So the Mennonites then went down into an area called Taurida, and Taurida is on the Black Sea here. Our Volga population is over here. Now Taurida, this area in here, was now settled by the Mennonites as they went in. Second partition was Volhynia. The Polish landowners invited German peasants to come and lease the land for their cultivation. So they went in now from West Prussia and Poland to go in there. 1830, the Polish insurrection sent even more immigrants now to Russia, into the area called Bessarabia and Volga. Bessarabia is this section up here above Odessa. Volhynia is this area here. The Volga over in here, and Taurinia is here, or Cherson. This is very well documented, the people who moved there, the people who left from there, and where they went. Okay, 1874, the Russian government decides they're going to withdraw all of these privileges, and all of a sudden now the Germans are without their special privileges, and this has started a migration. So now we got time, we can take a quick break.